Hello everyone, welcome to the second of our webinars on learning and play. Guys, thanks so much for joining us again. It's really fantastic to have you back, for those of you who came last time, and for the first time for those of you who are just joining us. So these webinars are being supported by the Department of Education here in WA, and we're really thankful for their support. But most of all, we're thankful to you guys for joining us. We know your lives are busy. We know being a teacher is not only a full-time job, but something that occupies all your time. So thanks. Now, guys, today we're going to be talking about the 7 ways children play and learn outside. And it really is such an important topic. I mean, we know, for example, from a survey that Nature Play conducted last year, that only 55% of Australian children are playing outside every day, outside of their school environment, that is. So that's a really significant drop off in play. So how we foster that, how we support that in our school settings is increasingly important. And we know that play isn't just an entertainment. It's not just a light thing. It can be light, it can be heavy, it can be dramatic, it can be all manner of things. But we know that it really helps build that curiosity. We know it builds agency. We know it's an expression of kids' desire to communicate with each other. And all of those things come together to make it a really potent way for children to learn and to develop together. So today you're going to have some fantastic information from our wonderful colleagues around observing children's play and what that means for you as educators. Without getting too much further into it, I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful Denise Anson, who's going to lead you into this fantastic webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Griff. Thanks, Griff. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series of outdoor play and learning webinars. I'd like to start off with introducing our outdoor education consultants, Trudy Bennett and Daniel Burton. Hi,
Hello,
everyone.
everybody. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for coming in to share time with us, sharing your knowledge and your insight about David Sobel's play motifs. Really looking forward to this one. Everybody, in the first part of our conversation today, we'll discuss each of the 7 play motifs. Then we'll invite you to participate in a poll. The question is, after hearing about the 7 ways that children play, which play motif have you observed students engage with and enjoy the most? And you'll submit your answer as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So take a note of each of the play motifs as we go so that you can choose the number for you. Please also contribute your questions. Today we've got a live Q&A after our first play conversation. So we're looking forward to answering all your questions at that time. And we've also got another Q&A after the second conversation. So lots of chance for you to be involved with us today. In part 2, we're going to discuss the role of the educator and how to set up the outdoor environment with inviting play spaces, which can be used for learning and to support children's play throughout the day. The importance of collaboration and shared outdoor experiences is highlighted in the general capabilities, the early years learning framework, and the national quality standard. So you can find specific links to these documents on the Nature Play WA website. You just need to look under the Outdoor Learning Webinar References tab and you'll find those references there. David Sobel is Emeritus Professor at Antioch University in New England. He's a leading American educator and has written extensively about the place-based philosophy which he helped develop and the importance of children forming relationships with nature through hands-on education and play. So we'll have a look at those 7 motifs together now. We've got special places, number 1. We've got hunting and gathering, number 2. Small worlds, number 3. Fantasy and imagination, number 4. Animal allies, number 5. Maps and pathways, number 6. And adventure, number 7. So those are the 7 motifs that we'll be looking at today, and you need to take a note of which one that you enjoy the most observing your children play with. So Trudy, can you share your understanding of the 7 play motifs?
Thanks, Denise. So these 7 play motives are the way that children across time, across different cultures, tend to play. And it's like a pattern or a trend for children. And David Sobel suggests for teachers that you can use these play motives as a way to motivate and engage children in lessons. So I want to show you this book. This is David Sobel's book, Children and Nature Design Principles for Educators. And he's a place-based educator researcher. So place-based education is about really getting to know the place where you live or where your school is. So it's to do with more than just research. It is also about knowing your space and knowing who you're sharing the world with, what birds, plants, and that kind of thing you're also sharing that space with. But it's also about connecting and feeling a sense of belonging to that space. And that's where play is really important in building that sense of connection to a space. And then when you get that sense of connection and knowing a place, then you know how to be an active participant in the community of that space as well. So that's really, really important. So David's been researching from a child-based perspective, so really observing what children do in lots of different cultures. And we, with other researchers, have found that this is also common across time through history as well. So children play in these ways all the time. And Daniel and I see that the programs we run, and we hear from teachers as well that this is really common types of play. So when we really understand it, then we know, okay, well, what if we base a lesson on this type of play? If we can take an element of this play and that play and incorporate it somewhere in our lessons, this is really going to engage the students that we work with.
Thanks, Trudy. That's a great introduction. And now look, let's take a closer look at the play motifs. Daniel, we'll start with one of the most obvious ones to identify, special places. We all know how children love to build cubbies and dens, hide away in teepees, tree houses, hidden corners. What's the significance of special places?
Well, I'm glad we get to start with this one. Special places, I think, is one that sits very close to Trudy and my heart. And we like to think of ourselves as cubby experts. It's what we get to do as work every single day. But cubbies and special places, forts, dens, huts, whatever the term is that is used to describe them, are so important for children. I think initially from a perspective of so much of children's lives decided for them, the places where they live, the places where they play, these are spaces that are designed, developed and created for them. Even from a perspective of their own bedroom, they may get a choice of what colour goes on the wall if they're repainting their bedroom, maybe a decision over furniture, but generally speaking, adults in their lives make the decisions about their places. So when children get the opportunity to build cubbies and forts and teepees and huts and dens, they get to decide. So they become their special places because they're in control. And it gives them a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. It's like they're creating their own home and nest. Yeah, even if it's a found space in a bush setting, or if it's a cubby that's made out of sticks and fabric and tarps in the backyard, or trees at the end of the school ground, that spaces can be turned into cubby spaces. These are all places where children can have control and they can have connection in that space. So it's also a place, when we're talking about special places, that children make where they get to say who comes and who goes. And I think it's something really important to add here, that often we talk to children who are making forts or dens that they have to include everybody in the spaces that they make. The inspiration that we take is when somebody knocks on our front door of our house, we have the control to say who comes in and who doesn't, essentially. We get to make that decision. So we're very strong in letting children have a decision over who gets to come in to their spaces, into their huts and cubbies and their spaces. It goes back to essentially a primitive instinct of safety and shelter, and special places is a very special play motif.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Educators will also be familiar with children's love of collecting little bits and pieces and going on treasure hunts. Can you explain the importance of hunting and gathering, Trudy?
Well, he doesn't love an Easter egg hunt or a treasure hunt or a pirate bat. These are all great things. And again, it goes back to that primitive instinct. So children have evolved essentially to play the way that they need to learn to survive in essentially what was a hunter-gatherer society. So we've all come from a hunter-gatherer society at one time. So this form of play is one of those other survival plays. So it's about how do we feed ourselves and how do we get the resources that we need to do the play that we have. So one thing that I love is the resurgence of kitchen gardens in schools, because this is bringing healthy eating and they're trying to get children to diversify what they eat, which is sometimes really restricted by using hunter-gatherer play. So when you get to dig in the dirt and sow seeds, collect seeds, harvest things out of the garden, that is engaging that kind of play. And when I was a kitchen garden teacher, the one thing that the children loved the most was digging potatoes. It was like a treasure hunt, digging through the dirt, trying to find the potatoes. It was so exciting because it had that element of play. So we encourage teachers that when you go out into an outdoor classroom, how can you incorporate this hunting and gathering? Like, where can you gather the resources that you need from outside for your lesson? Can you hide things that children need to go and find? And that will bring in some of that hunter-gatherer play. It's also about grinding things as well and processing materials. So a lot of chemical science comes into this, and potion making is a big love of children as well. So grinding up leaves or charcoal or limestone, adding water, all that kind of thing. Even sandcastle play is a representation of hunting and gathering.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely. Those little treasures that you're talking about that children find and collect, sometimes they make their way into new little lands by the rocks, by logs, just in the grass or sand. Daniel, can you share your understanding of the small worlds motif?
What's absolutely. So small worlds, it follows on actually really nicely from special places, and it's a miniature version of that essentially. The small worlds play motif from our perspective is a really great way where children get an opportunity to play with abstract concepts. So they exist within communities, within neighbourhoods that have streets and houses and buildings, networks of ways to get from here to there. And the small worlds motif allows them to get a very tactile, hands-on, kinesthetic version of, those things: homes, neighbourhoods, communities, rail networks, roads, and miniature worlds. And it's a chance for them to play out on that small scale something manageable that they can really delve into to understand abstract concepts about the world that they live in.
That's right. The abstract becomes quite tangible, doesn't it, when it's just in a little tiny world like that. The outdoor environment is so stimulating for dramatic play, storytelling, dress-ups. Trudy, as you mentioned in the first webinar, the energy of a class dissipates when you take them outside. How can we use that energy though, the enthusiasm, how can we harness that for fantasy and imagination as a play motif?
That's a great thing about imagination and fantasy, especially when you allow space for drama. Drama is about being able to be yourself and then be more than yourself. So turning yourself into something even bigger. So I'd like to connect this with special places, because these play motives shouldn't be seen as in isolation on their own. Children mix and match these all the time. So if we look at special places and fantasy and imagination, we can see in 3 to 5 year olds that there's a lot of monster play. So there's a monster trying to get into their base and they've got to try and protect them and keep the monster out. So there's a lot of play around that. Or about homes. Who's going to be mum? Who's going to be dad? Who's going to be the baby? Who's going to be the dog? And playing, like Daniel said, to learn what it is like to be that household that they live in. That's their world. The older ones, they get into more survival play, and they're playing either like the Survivor TV show, being outside on a deserted island by themselves, or they're playing being a primitive tribe or Indigenous tribe. So that's something that we see very often.
Thank you. And when you think about children playing with families and homes and that type of thing, there's always animals involved, isn't there? So the next topic is animal allies. What's the meaning of this play motif, Daniel?
Well, I think as Trudy just said, it links very much into that fantasy and imagination realm. They play dogs, cats, tigers, lions, all the animals. And we see young children take on animal forms and they play out those characters. But that form actually comes into older children's play as well. And it's a wonderful place for us to start to develop empathy as children. David Sobel says, one of his famous quotes is, we need to support children to fall in love with the earth before we ask them to save it. And I think it's also true for animals and the environment. If children have the opportunity to play and embody being an animal, they then get an understanding of what it's like to be that animal through its form, through its interactions with other living beings and the environment. And then they build empathy for that animal. And then they have a better connection to be able to empathize with needing to support the environment where these animals live. It's also a great place to connect with the scientific element of understanding other beings, insects, animals, the bigger world, because when we physically take on characteristics of a being, then we understand it more intrinsically. We get a mind-body connection, and for those kinesthetic learners out there, it is definitely an important way to connect with more abstract concepts once again.
Thanks. So we've had 5 play motifs. We've got 2 to go. So let's just go next to the next one, maps and pathways, Trudy. Most children love to create shortcuts, follow paths, explore, do all of that type of thing. Can you just tell us about the play motifs, the play and pathway motifs?
Yeah, so I remember as a kid always getting told off at school with my friends for cutting over the grass or through a garden bed and we should be walking on the brick path. That's because kids always want to take shortcuts. And they're curious about how to make a sense of adventure in their journey. So they'll try different pathways all the time, and often they'll take the hardest route, not the easiest route, because that's the most adventurous, which we'll get to very soon. So when you're talking about including it in a lesson, well, how can you incorporate that idea of map making or finding treasure through building a map? So that can also be linked in with hunting and gathering as well. So it's about making maps and finding new routes to places.
So that leads us really to the final play motif, adventure. David Sobel says walks are for adults and adventures are for kids. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think if we think about talking to children and saying, okay, kids, we're going on a walk, you might get responses of grumbles. But if you say, all right, kids, we're going on an adventure. I mean, even the voice that you use to say the word adventure changes. So the intention behind the journey changes as well. So adventures are simply the way we get from A to B in a more energetic, exciting, playful way. It's about kinesthetically connecting with the environment. Can we jump, climb, skip, run, walk in different ways? If we can move from A to B in more exciting ways, more playful ways, then it becomes an adventure. And I think if we can see every transition as an adventure, then we have different intentions behind the way we move through our spaces. And maybe we look differently and we notice more things on those journeys. Even if it's from the classroom to the oval, can that be an adventure?
And I'd say yes, the answer is yes. Thanks, Trudy and Daniel. You've given us a great overview of those 7 play motifs. It's been so informative, and now we'd just like our participants to have a moment to think about what they've observed in their settings, what have they seen their children do in play. So let's bring up the poll question.
Well, it's going to be hard to decide.
So yes, participants, people watching, just think about what you've seen your children do and choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7. We'll share the results at the end of the webinar. So we'll just give you a moment to think about what have you observed your students engage with. Okay, hopefully that was enough time for everybody. We're going to now move on to the question and answer section. So Trudy and Daniel, get ready, get your thinking hats on. And just to alert you, question and answer time. Time to answer the questions of the participants. So just to let you know, the first one is from Karen. Can you share some examples of how an understanding of play motifs impacts the way you teach?
Great question. Thank you, Karen. I think if we understand how children are playing, and these 7 motifs are universal, we see this, as Trudy said at the start, coming out in all children's play across all socioeconomic areas, across all age bands, then we have an understanding of the things that motivate children most intrinsically. It gets to their heart. So when we come from a place of using their play as inspiration, then we've already tapped into their heart, and so we can access their mind and support them to develop understanding, to develop knowledge, and to develop learning attributes through what really connects with them. When we come from learning through play, we get more connected ways of learning.
I think when you're outside too, you see the students instantly wanting to go into those play motives. And so if you don't make space for that, you're constantly trying to push them into doing what you want to do as a teacher. So I'm finding Daniel and I have been working closely with some schools recently over the last couple of years, and I've had 3 schools last term. So one I was looking at mostly adventure, the other one was special places. One, I didn't put much in it at all, and I was fighting that the whole time because the kids were saying special places, special places, special places. I was going like, no, we have to do this work. But my most successful one, and when I mean success, I mean that the students were most engaged. They got the most out of it from a learning aspect as well. Like they soaked more in and learnt more from that experience. Was the one that was fully into special places. So we actually planned and started with that as the main goal. And we could see they definitely got more out of it because we started with that play motive.
Okay, so Erica has now asked a question. Does one play motif tend to be stronger or more important perhaps than the others?
Oh, that's a big question.
I reckon that comes down to teacher passion too, because you need to be passionate about this yourself, and wanting to engage in this with your students for it to work the most comprehensively, or to have the richness to do with it. So I mean, Daniel and I, our big passion is cubbies, so special places we'll go to every time. But that's from our love, and I've seen other teachers that will have a hunting and gathering love, and it's whatever you're passionate about the most. I'd recommend starting there.
Okay.
Yep, I agree.
So this is a really interesting one from Jenna. Are boys and girls just as likely as each other to play in a particular type of play motif? So what differences do you notice between boys and girls?
Take this one on.
Yeah, absolutely. The simple answer is no, because these play motifs can be seen across all children, no matter no matter their gender. I think our educator expectation and our society's expectation of the ways boys and girls play differently comes into it, so that there is the potential that we can set up experiences or expect boys or girls to engage with a certain experience or play motif more specifically. So that's a danger. I'm working at the moment with an all-boys school, an all-girls school, and a co-ed school in very similar age groups. And I'm seeing that each group has similar energies and similar passions for each play motif across those 3 different experiences. So I think we need to be aware of the bias and the experience that we bring to the situation and what we're looking for, rather than it being about what boys and girls more specifically play into.
Thanks, Daniel. I think that is a really interesting question, and we could probably have a really long discussion about that. Yes, that's right. But we're actually moving on to the second conversation now, which is about the role of the teacher. in play? So what does the educator do, and how we can apply these play motifs to curriculum and spaces? So first question, let's start with the role of the educator, Daniel. So with what you've just described, what does the educator actually do?
Yeah, so I think that links with what the last question was. I think the main step for an educator, a teacher working and wanting to bring in these motifs, these play motifs as motivating play ways to engage their children, is they need to step back and observe, first of all. In our first webinar that we did, we spoke about the importance of stepping back and using play as an opportunity to observe and notice what children are doing, to be able to link in with their passions. And I think that is definitely what's important with utilising these play motifs. Stepping back, observing, especially when these play motifs are explored outdoors, we see different sides of children. We see what inspires them, we see what motivates them, and then that gives us insight into how we can then motivate them and link on with those ways that they're engaging. The teacher's role is to play alongside. That's a really powerful step that a teacher can do, an educator can do. They're there to resource, to provide observations, and to provide questions.
And that leads me to my next question. Trudy, when does the teacher know when to make a comment or ask a question or not? How do you know what to do?
Look, it's really, really hard. And Daniel and I have been in this industry for, I don't know, 15 years now, and we've been running all our own programs outdoors every day for the last 5 years. And it's a really difficult one, and I'm still learning. And you've got to take each situation as it comes. So what I do is, like Daniel said, go from the observation first. And so before I even get close to a group of children, I look at them and say, okay, what are these guys doing? What are they really investigating here? What are they really interested in? And then what do they need next to extend what they're doing? And then how can I help them grow what they're doing or what they're investigating even more? So does it mean that their energy is dying in that, and so I need to come and boost some energy through my play? Does it mean that there's a resource that I know of somewhere in the school that I can bring along, and that will give them an extra level of challenge? Is there a wondering question that I can spark wondering down, a sideline to where they're going, or to test to see if I've got it right or not? Or are they totally fine? Their energy's high, they're getting a lot of learning out of it, and actually I need to just kind of spy on them and write down what they're saying for my assessing later, or just back off and give them some space because they actually need space. So it really comes down to that questioning first.
It sounds like you're a little bit of a stage manager there. So the same way a stage manager would decide what needs to be added or taken away from a theatre type of play, this type of play needs the same sort of touch. When to step in, when to step back. And as you say, you can use the time to observe and document learning as well. When you do take time to think and observe without interacting too much. So in the first webinar, we heard about how outdoor play and learning can take place outside your classroom, in a little bit of bush by the oval that may be out of bounds, or in a designated outdoor classroom area that you might have created. Can you give us a couple of examples from these places of how the play motifs can be integrated into outdoor lessons?
Okay, let's start with a really simple one that's numeracy based. And in some of our other nature Play WA workshops, we talk about a game called Build a Tower. And this is a simple game that involves dice. You roll a dice, the number on the dice tells you how many sticks that you can place, and then you place your sticks in a crisscross pattern to create a tower. Now, this game can be played indoors, and you could use materials such as MABs. I bet when I said the word MABs, everybody's got a picture of what that tower might look like. However, in an outdoor classroom, using play motifs, we could use hunting and gathering to actually gather the resources of sticks. We could find sticks in the spaces that we use. I mean, that does mean that our gardeners in our schools need to not clear all of the sticks and tree debris from the playground, which often happens. So a conversation with the gardeners is important. But then, so we're hunting and gathering, we're finding special places, and we're setting up space outside. We're using adventure in that process to engage and collect resources. And then we're actually using construction and numeracy skills to play the game with natural resources.
You could even bring in measurement in that. So informal measurement, students, or even formal, they'll need to get a 20 centimetre stick or a stick as long as their forearm, and that kind of thing in the actual hunting and gathering part of it.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I've got another example where that comes from like watching. So if you've got a space where your students are allowed to go and have some free unstructured play in an outdoor space, and that you'd like to then bring in and extend from there. So an example I had last term was this class of year 2-3s was petrified of ants, because at their school they had bitey ants. And so they wouldn't sit down on the grass. But there was a group of boys that were really, really interested in all these ants coming out of an ant nest. And so before I approached, I thought, oh, are they interested in the homes of ants? Are they interested in conquering their fear about ants? Are they interested about what ants eat or where ants go? And I'm also thinking, okay, what play motives can I use here? So maps and pathways, let's go track the ants. So it's like, oh, hey, where are these ants coming from? Where are they going? And let's try and find them. And we follow the trail. Or are they interested in special places of ants? So you could link this into building a shelter for an animal like an ant as a way to reflect on that. So from this experience of watching the group of boys, I could bring it to a maps angle, and we can represent that with like found loose parts around the place, and we can build our own ant trail to represent that trail. Or we could take it from an animal allies and special places link, and then, okay, let's build what we think an ant's nest looks like under the ground. How can we build that with natural materials? Are there any other creatures that have shelters around this area, and we can build their shelters too? And so, or it could be hunting and gathering. Let's make a meal for an ant. Let's go collect these and put it on a little bark plate and offer the ants a meal. So, you know, there's lots of different motives that you can bring in to extend something that you're observing with your students.
Lots of different play motifs, but I'm also hearing you touch on quite a few different learning areas there as well. You mentioned loose parts there, and we won't delve into that too much at the moment because we've got a whole webinar on that next week. But additional resources, what sort of things can a teacher take into the space to really enhance the learning? So I'm thinking perhaps, you know, a clipboard and pens and paper or something like that, or whiteboards. What sort of resources like that would you recommend?
Well, there's a couple of levels to think about, and one is the general large infrastructure. So if you're thinking, you know, you would like to be out in the space a lot, you know, where's a place to sit, and where's a place to hide, and where's a place to build big, and where's a place to build small, and where's a place to have adventures that you can connect things together, and where are there secret paths? So when you're thinking about designing a big space, and a lot of these things can be really simple and don't need to be expensive, is thinking about, okay, where are those 7 things incorporated in this big space? And then from there, thinking about, okay, well, what are those smaller things that we can use to resource learning? So like clipboards, pens and paper, it's great. So either having that in a tub that you can bring out, or maybe there's a veranda where you can put a cupboard underneath where those things are instantly accessible. Things like clay, you know, in the ant thing, they could build their own ant to go in their own ant hill later, you know, out of clay. So some of those added natural materials are really useful as well. And then for fantasy and imagination, materials, just could be dress ups or the wall of a special place cubby, rope to tie things together. Those kind of things are really useful additions.
I know you said, Denise, that we'll talk more about loose parts in the next webinar, but on that idea that Trudy's just said about fabrics and dress-ups, fabrics and tarps and materials that can use to create special places and forts and cubbies and dens and huts is really important too. And Trudy mentioned places where you can hide. And I think that's one thing to think about when resourcing the 7 play motifs is children these days are observed constantly. And we watch them, and they don't have many opportunities to hide away and have their own space. So cubbies and shelters and things that are made with maybe light material that is kind of see-through gives a sense of hidden nature and secret space, but also still provides opportunity in the playground to observe and be aware of where the children are.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think you can use nature in that way, can't you, as well, where you plant in some bushes, the children feel like they're hidden away, but in fact, you can see through the leaves or the branches and see what's happening from a supervisory point of view, but the children feel hidden.
And then those plants can also offer resources. So like the gum nuts, the leaves, the bark, the flowers, all those things then can be a resource for small world play.
Thank you. And just look, this is a really important question. How much time do we need to leave for uninterrupted free play time?
Yes. So
how much time?
Well, sorry.
What's the importance of it?
Yeah, I think in the name, unstructured free play time, we could almost just call that play time because the actual essence of play means that it's unstructured, self-directed, and that it's guided by children. There's a lot of other terms we place in the front of play, which actually often changes the purpose of the play and it no longer becomes play. So I think it's really important, and we need to remember that often the spaces that we're taking outdoor learning, we're building outdoor classrooms, we're utilising spaces in the school for outdoor learning, are spaces that children have played in, either at recess, at lunchtime, or maybe after school if it's that out of bounds space at the end of the school oval. These are places where their play, their own unstructured play already exists. So we need to be aware that we need to give them time to play in free, unstructured ways in those spaces before we ask them to engage with learning outcomes that we've decided for that lesson. So integrating that into each experience that we have is really important. And transitions is a way that you can do that as well and support on time, and the ways that we get to that space. We spoke in the last webinar about meeting. So if you're going to the outdoor classroom after recess, maybe meet in that outdoor classroom rather than back at the class and then have to transition to that outdoor classroom. That's why we could save time.
I think it's important to remember that children learn through play, essentially. That's the way that they learn.
Thanks, Trudy. And I've actually just popped up the question transition to say that we're going to start hearing some questions from participants right now. So thank you for that. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
It's okay.
This is a question from an anonymous person, but it's a very interesting one. I was interested in hearing about the idea of allowing children to control who can have access to their special places. I'm aware of teacher talk based on being inclusive, and how can we have children feeling they have a sense of ownership while not excluding others?
I think it comes down to respect for language as well, and finding, helping students find a place. Like everyone needs to have their own special place. And so it's how to interact. So we have this all the time at our programs, and we started, thinking about making everyone include, and it just, didn't seem fair for those that had worked really hard on building that cubby, and then suddenly somebody wants to come in and they didn't contribute any of the work. So something that we say to kids that want to come in is like, oh, what can you offer this group? Come with your skill. So it's helping children identify what is their skill and unique thing, and it's like, oh, I can bring this to your community. So that's one way I like to work on it. The other way is to find them a space. So maybe there's a couple of students that are trying to get in and finding a space, so helping them get together and make a little community themselves. And the other thing is to know that some people just want to make war, because war is part of play. So sometimes there's exclusion and invasion because there's a group that want to engage in war play, and that there is a place for that.
Well, that leads us exactly into the next question from Vanessa. Do you allow children to resolve conflicts and differing opinions, or is there a need to intervene or redirect them to keep them engaged and motivated?
I think so. There's a lot of parenting terms out there about helicopter parents, and I think the latest one is lawnmower parents. that kind of get rid of every obstacle that's in the way of their children. And there's a real danger to that, because children then don't develop the skills to be able to deal with conflict and deal with resolving issues. So absolutely, as the educator, we're there as a support, and the students know that. But ideally, we want them to try out their strategies first. And if we don't give them opportunities to try out strategies of resolving conflict as 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 12-year-olds, then they're going to find that really tricky when they're 13, 14, 18, 25. So I think the stakes are much lower when we're talking about the conflict that happens in play in a school playground, in our outdoor classrooms. So there's opportunities for them to experience safer conflict, and then have us as an adult to support them with, as Trudy was saying, the language behind resolving conflict.
And that leads into Erica's question actually about the links established between the need to develop or experience and play with the play motifs and social emotional well-being. So I think you're leading into this question, aren't you? What benefits for social and emotional well-being can come out of experiencing the play motifs?
Well, what I've noticed is that children are more motivated to solve their own conflicts and negotiate and cooperate in an outdoor play setting than they are in say an indoor classroom. So because they're more vested in it, they're more interested in it, they're more engaged in it, they don't want to see it fail. And so they are going to put more effort into negotiating and cooperating with each other. And then our role as an educator would be then to support their growth in that space. So, if a child comes to me and they're really upset with something someone said to them, it'll be, oh, well, how did you respond? And see if they did make a response, and then I can offer advice on that. And did you try this? Go back and give this a go. And if that doesn't work, it's like, would you like me to be there while you have a discussion with these people on how you felt? So it's offering different levels of support.
That's right. What about teaching children respect for animals and the environment? Do you have any techniques? Rachel's asking for that. So teaching respect.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about empathy and we're talking about respect for environment, absolutely. We still need to respect the resources, for example, the trees. And when we're talking about harvesting resources from trees, it's often the things that have fallen off the tree, because if a whole school worth of children come along and pull 5 leaves off a tree, that tree is not going to have many leaves or sticks on it anymore. And the same for ants and insects and birds and spiders.
Squish.
Yeah, it's about the respect that we can give for those animals and insects and beings. I think also, coming back to the animal allies element, when we're playing on embodying and taking on those animal forms, and we're playing with and around insects and animals in the environment, we come to respect them more. So the fear that comes from, say, ants and really bitey ants in our playgrounds, when we're spending more time in the environment, we become more aware of them, how to change our behaviour around them, and therefore how to respect them and not fear them, because it's often through fear that we get the squish. So yeah, if we're not scared of the spider, we're less likely to want to kill it. And I think that would go for adults as well. Come to embrace those creepy crawlies in your environment, and you'll not want to kill them.
That's right. Erin's asking, if a group of children never seem to use one of the particular play motifs, would you encourage that? Or if they want to play, they've got their favourite ones, which we'll hear about in the poll, if they've got their favourite ones, would you just allow that, or would you sometimes try and encourage a new play motif?
I think that comes down to a balance of mastery and diversity in your skill set as a human being. First, I would ask though, are all the play needs resourced for that play? Because if a child's not playing in that way, maybe it's because there's no resources to play in that way. And so the first thing I would do is have a look, okay, what resources, what time, what community is out there for this type of play, and is there anything I can add into that? So it could be, okay, we're going to bring a whole heap of fabrics because there's not enough imagination play or something like that, or buckets and pots and things. Or do I just go into a play motive and I play that play motive and to see if that triggers some play in that area.
I think also we need to remember that permission is a resource. And I would be asking, do the children feel like they have actual permission to play into those things? So do they have the permission, either verbal or unspoken, to play into special places, to build small worlds, to change the environment and the resources that they've got access to? Fantasy and imagination, adventure. Do they have permission to move in different ways that show an adventure rather than just a walk? So permission is a resource.
Yes, so there's a question here saying there's nowhere interesting or adventurous nearby to walk to from the school. So how could we develop adventure play at school? So I think you started to answer that by just saying how you can introduce all those different materials.
Yeah, okay.
How can the school be an adventure?
Yep. Okay. So I have a passion to try and abolish walking in lines in schools all across the world, because I feel like it's a very unnecessary step. I will say there, a caveat, when we need to go on an excursion or we're going outside the school grounds, making 2 lines to make it easy to count and know how many children you have in and out, that is perfectly fine. But if we're moving from the classroom to the oval, if it's walking in lines purely to be about respect and being quiet, then I challenge that. And I challenge that with a game called Ninja. So ninjas are really stealthy and they're quiet, and their aim is not to be seen or heard. So my challenge to the students that I work with is, can you move from this classroom to the oval or to the library or to wherever we're going as ninjas? So in that process, they're not disrupting other classes because they're being quiet. And they're trying to be stealthy, so they're not seen. So therefore, visually, they're not disrupting other classes. And I've achieved my goal of getting the children transition from one space to another. It doesn't need to be in a line. We spend so much time in schools waiting for children to line up and be quiet.
Yeah.
And it's not a necessary fact. So ninjas, I challenge everybody in this webinar to go and try that tomorrow at school.
The takeaway idea, ninjas. Should play motifs be open-ended, asks Seema.
It can be either. So it depends what kind of lesson you've got coming up. So if it is a space where you want to observe what the children are interested in your outdoor classroom space to try and plan your next series of lessons, for example, then definitely open. Or if it's a regular time where you are allowing children to learn in the way that they need to learn or want to learn in the outside place, then that's open. But if there's a particular curriculum activity that you want to do in the outdoor space, so say if it's a maths activity like the Build a Tower and you're doing addition and that kind of stuff, it's about how do you incorporate the play motive into that. So that game started with hunting and gathering. Or if it's, okay, we're going to do a line of inquiry on ants, then, okay, today we're doing maps and pathways and we're mapping out where the ants go. So it's just about what your needs are in terms of curriculum connection as well.
Thanks. I think at this point we might just have a quick look at the poll question results because I'm quite intrigued to see what people have been observing their children engage with. So I'll ask Nicole. Yep, Nicole's already on that. So what have we got? Number 1, we've got quite a few special places. Number 6 is not very much. We don't see that very often. That's the maps and pathways. Not enough adventure, but definitely number 4, fantasy and imagination. Actually, that's a great one to see. So look, we'll thank everybody for sharing their input there. And we've come to the end of the webinar. So thank you for your fascinating insights, Trudy and Daniel. That's been very interesting hearing about the 7 play motifs today. Just a reminder that you'll be able to access a recording of this webinar and our first webinar called Providing Outdoor Learning and Play Opportunities for Children on the Nature Play website. But we've still got 3 webinars to come. Next week, you can join us on Thursday, the 22nd of October for resourcing effective outdoor play and learning with loose parts. So that's It'll be a very, very interesting practical webinar for you. In 2 weeks, on Tuesday, the 27th of October, we'll be discussing implementing outdoor play, and that one's at 7 o'clock. So please note the time change there. And the final webinar will be hosted by Griffin Longley, who's going to be discussing creating unforgettable memories for families. And that one is at 7:30 on Wednesday, the 4th of November. And we're looking forward to that one. So back to you, Griff. Thanks.
I'm just going to cut in because I want to say thanks everyone for your questions. They were really amazing questions. So thank you for your interaction today.
And thanks, Daniel and Trudy. That was great. So everyone, I hope you gathered some information during that session. It was really interesting to watch your questions. There was an awful lot of stuff that came in that we didn't have time to get to. We may look to answer some of those by email. Look, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. The first one that I touched on last time we had our webinar, and just a reminder, if you missed that one, you can see it on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type in Nature Play WA, and it'll be there for you to watch in your own time. But the idea that I want to leave you with is simply that play is not the thing that gets done after all the important stuff is done. It's a core human inheritance. It's part of the glory of being a child. It really is the way that children engage, interpret, and mold their world. You know, I mean, as Dan and Trudy talked about, there's so much observation, so much direction, and it's in play when kids are in charge of their world, and they can take bits of information that you've taught them, that they've picked up through their social interactions, they've brought to school with them from their communities and their families, and they can put those in scenarios, and they can run ideas against other ideas, and they can take on roles, and through that they can interpret their world, and in that process they build agency, that ability to be an active participant in their communities, in their own lives, and build that confidence and that curiosity that we all need, not just as learners but as human beings. And look, creativity, just that ability to make a creative use of what you find to hand. And we know in our lives as adults that is a core skill. You know, in our jobs, you know, we might get training, we might have preparation, but when we arrive at our job, we're left ultimately to make a creative use of what presents itself to us. That's exactly the skill of play. That's what kids are doing. So it's really up to us to help provide children with those opportunities to learn, to enjoy being children, to learn to master their world and their emotions. So guys, well done. Thank you for being with us. This workshop also will be posted to YouTube. We're going to be sending you all an email following the webinar. There'll be a resource in there, a printed resource detailing some of the information you've heard about the play motifs, something you can draw back on and share with colleagues. There's also going to be a survey. We're really keen to find out more from you about your thoughts on this subject and on what we've delivered and whether we can do things better. At the end of that survey, there'll be a link through to get a certificate for your PD. And guys, remember there's another 3 of these to come. The one I'm going to be presenting, if you feel so inclined to communicate to your parent families that it's something they can engage with, and really the core idea I'm going to be sharing with them is to support you in your efforts to bring play into their school life. Because I think sometimes, you know, there's a bit of a game of Chinese whispers between parents and teachers, each side guessing at what the other side is thinking, and often getting it wrong. So I really want to encourage parents to understand the importance of play for their children's well-being and their learning, and to support you as educators in bringing that powerful tool and that really wonderful fun activity into these kids' lives. So please encourage them to join me for that, and we'll have Dan and Trudy back in a week's time. Thanks very much.